Hi everyone. This is Dan Golding. Thanks so much for inviting me to sort of contribute to your reading group, the Caledonian Reading Group. I think Darshana called it. It's really cool. I'm really excited that you read and talked about the journal article that I have in the Journal of Sound and Music in Games. I really enjoyed the opportunity to publish something academic about my creative work. It's basically the first time I've ever done that, so that was a whole new experience for me. Um, and I think it's really great to have the opportunity to have a bit of back and forth. So I've just finished doing some teaching for the day. I've got my setup here already. So I've loaded a couple of your questions into some slides. I'll just run them through. Someone asks, while Hertzfeld considers atmospheric game music in relation to space, how can we consider such music in relation to time? With Goose Game, a lot of us notice the way the tension is created. Can you tell us about the thinking and implementation about this? Any specific problems arose? Yeah, I mean, so I've been thinking a lot about this because I've had some questions about space, about time, and particularly about tension. And I think, the way the music works, actually, none of us really thought about these questions specifically. They're definitely frameworks for analysis, but what we were thinking about was dynamics and timing. So tension is created not because tension was a deliberate kind of analytic framework that we thought about while creating the game and the game's audio music system, but because dynamism was something that we thought about while doing that. If you've read the journal article, you know that we had the two different two different performances, one with really aggressive performance, and one with quite soft performance. So it's to do with dynamics, I think, and almost like velocity. If we think of velocity as the way that how much. Sorry, I've got my keyboard down here. How much how heavily you whack the keys. That's kind of what we thought about. And so then it was a case of kind of implementing those two performances in such a way as the timings would work. And then that, different dynamic performance would relate to the dynamics of what was happening on the screen. So actually tension is kind of the byproduct, and obviously the end goal of that process was tension. But yeah, thinking of it strictly in terms of space, time, those sort of traditional analytical questions to do with games and music and sound, I think they're really just byproducts and kind of post-release categories of analysis. That's just not the way that we thought about it when we were making it, which I think is kind of an interesting way to think about things anyway. Okay, so the next question is, with game music now having the ability to be so adaptive to the player's input, is this the way forward for game music? Will we see less and less of the retro straightforward town theme plays on loop when player passes border into town? Does this relate to the Mickey Mousing you note and build across cinematic and ludic contexts? Yeah, I'll just check that I didn't skip a question. Yeah, no, great. Yeah, for sure, right? I think it's still going to be relatively unusual that any game's music is so heavily tied to player input and the kind of game state in a really kind of specific set of contexts. We're talking about a game score that reacts in the degree of milliseconds, right, in terms of the way that the game state analyzes and plays the different velocity recordings of Debussy's preludes. I think it's also really, really key and really important that this music pre-existed the game. I think the fact that it was the case of adapting pre-existing music by Debussy into a game means that we could afford to think through these more technical questions rather than me simply writing music that was going to be adapted into the game. So I'm not sure whether this will set the agenda going forward. I think maybe thinking of this, these different strategies, I would probably will see different implementations, and I hope that people implement classical music into games into the future. But I mean, even just from my own context, thinking of, town theme plays on loop when the player passes border into the town. I mean, for another game that I did, Frog Detective 2, the second game in the Frog Detective series, for example, we do have a town theme, but it's kind of a jazz bed of music. And depending on which character you're closest to, a different instrument is soloing over the top of that bed. And so it's sort of the same principle as a geographic specific piece of music playing as you approach that geography, but the geography is the person rather than the town. So it's sort of, just making things a little bit more specific, a little bit more detailed. And I kind of think we'll see a little bit more of that into the future too. We talked about the time and place that music and games can evoke, and you've written about L.A. Noire before. I have written about L.A. Noire before. I really uncritically love that game. I know it's got a lot of critics and detractors, but I think there's some really, really interesting things about it. Has it been interesting how folks attribute a certain Englishness to the Untitled Goose Game world? Yeah, well, I mean, that was deliberate though. I mean, despite the fact that it was made here in Australia, and I think possibly even some of the members of House haven't even been to the UK. It was very deliberately researched as an English village. I won't tell you which English villages the game is based on, but there are specific English villages that were looked at by the developers to get inspiration. So it's not just folks, it's not just the kind of players in the games world attributing an Englishness to the game. That was deliberate. But I don't know about the music necessarily. I mean, Debussy was a French composer, very much more impressionist, though he rejected that label to some degree. Rather than necessarily a composer like Saint-Saëns, or later like Stravinsky or Holst, someone like that who deliberately took on the influence of folk music. Like Holst, for example, or Ravel, actually used English folk songs in their compositions in a way that Debussy probably doesn't. Although having said that, there is one piece in the game, Pickwick, homage to Pickwick, as in Pickwick from Dickens, Pickwick Papers. That's one piece, one movement of the preludes written by Debussy that was deliberately designed to be quite English. And we do use that in the game, actually. However, with the most English element of it edited out, there is, if you listen to that movement of Debussy's preludes right now on Spotify, you'll find that it begins with a lengthy, humorously ironic quotation of God Save the Queen, which we thought was perhaps just a little bit too on the nose, and perhaps a little bit too distracting for the world of Untitled Goose Game. So we cut that out, but the rest of the prelude is there. Okay. Now I think, do I have one more after this? Well, let's just go with this one. With game music now having the ability to be so adaptive to the player's input, is this the way? Oh, no, we already heard that. All right. You write about the background of the folks involved in Untitled Goose Game outside of video game, coming from fine arts, academics, and other contexts. Can you talk more about what this meant for such a game to be realized? Absolutely. I'm just going to check that I didn't accidentally not quite copy and paste one of those questions. No. Okay, cool. That's good. All right. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, I think that this is really, really, really key. I think that, this was not anybody's first video game. House had published Push Me Pull You before this. I had worked with them on Push Me Pull You, and I'd worked with Grace Bruxner on Frog Detective, I think 1 and 2, I'm not sure. Anyway, before Untitled Goose Game came out. So yeah, like it wasn't like we were newcomers to the games industry and total outsiders, but I still think that House as a studio exists somewhat outside or beyond the kind of accepted like common sense knowledge and the same sort of cultural connotations that you might expect in a traditional indie game studio. Like there's no like action figures on anybody's desk. I don't mean to belittle action figures, but that's the kind of thing you see in an indie studio, usually, like, or like vinyl, pop vinyls, those things, right? I don't think there's any of that in the House office. Like, I think they've got some plants. And now a lot of awards. It's ridiculous. But my point there, as I said, is not to belittle those things. Those things are totally fine. But that's the kind of thing that you often get involved with if you come to games through a games degree, as I'm sure many of you would know, or come to games entirely through games culture. The House guys, the four main men who formed the core of House, they came from, they did fine arts degrees. One of them did a film editing degree, did filmmaking, and so I think, and me as well, like, yes, I wrote a PhD on video games, but that was from within a cinema studies department. I've never really taught game making, for example. Ignore that email alert. And so, I think, like, when I sit down and have a conversation with House, I feel like I'm much more likely to have a conversation about, I don't know, a film that's out, a piece of music, anything like that. Probably more than a video game, really. Unless perhaps it's like your latest local multiplayer. They all have a passion for that, hence Push Me Pull You, the kind of sports friends, Mario Party stuff, right? That maybe we might have a conversation about, or I might hear about what they've been up to in that sense. But I don't think any of us are particularly drawn to those usual sorts of conversations about, I don't know, like, the latest big game that's come out, or, even the latest gossip in the indie games world. Like, it's not really part of the same mundane shared cultural interests in the same way as you might find at another studio. And so I do think that that's kind of important, because to go to the second part of this question, can you talk more about what this meant for such a game to be realized? Yeah, I think it means that when we were talking about humor, when we were talking about the use of music, what we're talking about is like, I immediately saw The Gardener and, realized a likeness with the Lumiere early comedy film, the water watered, or the gardener, as it's sometimes called, where it's often seen as the first comedy film, where a gardener gets hit in the face with a hose that's been stood on and to build up the pressure. It just seemed so similar, and there was a visual kind of similarity, and that kind of deliberate slapstick of the silent era, vaudeville. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we were talking about. I mean, it was Nico Disseldorp who works at House. It was his idea to include Debussy to begin with, and I think that's just because he was listening to it. Like, it wasn't like there was a whole bunch of research embarked upon to find the period perfect piece of music, or the piece of music that had the right connotations, or to do this in-depth survey about how classical music might work in a game. It was just part of Nico's mundane listening habits, and he kind of put a mental note on it, like, that's a fun piece of music, that's funny, that's humorous, maybe that might work in the game. And it did, right? But to get there, I mean, as you can tell from kind of the conversation that we're having, and I mean, like, God, even the stuff behind me, right? When I'm thinking about game music, like, to be honest, I'm probably not thinking about the latest indie video game, certainly not the latest AAA video game. I'm not thinking about how Assassin's Creed's music works when I'm working on Untitled Goose Game. Like, I'm thinking about Silent Cinema, I'm thinking about Camille Saint-Saëns, I'm thinking about Maurice Ravel. So I don't know, I just think that the kind of cultural ambit that people have when they're creating is kind of, it's significant, and it shapes the work, right? Your taste shapes the work that you create. So with that, I think that's about it, really. Thanks so much for reading the article, and thanks so much for Darshana getting in touch with me and asking me to come say hi. I'm so sorry that I couldn't join you live. It would have been a lot of fun. I really would have enjoyed that. It was 4 a.m. for me. So yeah, that was the reason. Although I did really think long and hard about joining you, I think in the end it was probably just it was a bridge too far, or an AM too far anyway. But yeah, thanks again. Also, Darshana has my email in case any of you want to get in touch and ask a specific follow-up or anything like that. But other than that, thanks. And I hope it was a good reading group. And I hope you may you have many good reading group events in the future. All right. Thanks so much.